So I'm going to call this gang of people into order. I'm Tom Rice. I'm going to introduce myself. I teach over at K. I've been teaching there for many, many, many years. I went to school at College School of Art in Philadelphia, and the University of Georgia, and kind of lived all over the place, but ended up in Kalamazoo to teach as a sabbatical replacement, and ended up here for a couple of years, and then went to California to teach at Whittier College, and then I ended up back at Kalamazoo College. So probably a total of about 33 years or so, no, more than that, 35 years at K. And I've been teaching sort of solid ever since I started. So that's who I am. The show Tipping Point is what I'm going to be talking about, and I'll do that in a minute. Is that okay? Okay. But first I want to start off by thanking the Richmond Center, the Department of Art and Design, and especially Patricia, Nida, and Katie for everything they did to help me with getting this show together. And I also want to thank Katie and the students for helping me hang the show. Also, I would like to acknowledge the Fulbright Canada for their support, because the pieces that are downstairs in the gallery that are the refinery pieces, they were done, or they were started while I was on a Fulbright to University of Alberta in Edmonton. Okay, tipping point. Now, tipping point, the term tipping point was made popular by Malcolm Gladwell with his book, Tipping Point, How Little Things Can Make a Big Difference. He talks about the idea of tipping points as being like social epidemics, okay, or trends, or like things going viral. But climate scientists and critical theorists, and they use that term in a slightly different way. And the way that they use it is that there's accumulating small changes suddenly and sometimes unpredictably cause a dramatic shift in the state of equilibrium, or a new normal is established, okay? So that's kind of where I'm coming from with this. At least I'm going to kind of use both those definitions. If you haven't read this book, The Overstory by Richard Powers, it's fantastic. But this is a quote. It's fiction, right? But he does a lot of research. So anyway, we're cashing in 1 billion years of planetary savings bonds and blowing it all on assorted bling. I feel like that sort of sums up my whole show down there. Okay. Another book that was really influential for me when I first started doing this work was The Great Derangement. It was published in 2016, I believe, by Amitav Ghosh. And this is pretty much, this passage here is about how he didn't see in literature, except for science fiction, many people dealing with the issue of climate change, and in the art world. And so this last sentence here, quite possibly then, this era which so congratulates itself on its self-awareness will come to be known as the time of the Great Derangement. I just thought that was perfect summation of our denial of this thing that's going on all around us. If you haven't read his book, it's really good, but he has a more recent one called The Nutmeg's Curse, which is just fantastic. He researches, he's a fiction writer, but he researches these things like crazy. Okay. So on to a little bit about my work. This is a piece that I showed at the Illinois Wesleyan University. There's 3 pieces. I'm going to talk more about this in a minute, but there's 3 pieces in this exhibition of this installation, and they're all 40 feet long. Let's see. So my talk is going to be about what it feels like to experience climate change rather than what Timothy Morton calls a data dump. I'm not going to lay a bunch of statistics on you. I've been making this work for about 10 years, and the work's concerned mostly with our human contribution to climate change, fossil fuel dependence, capitalism, imperialism, petrocultures, and environmental degradation. Okay, so a little background, and I think this little bit of background will kind of give you an idea of why my work looks the way it does and why I'm doing these things. That's me and my first car, right? That's a bike that has a steering wheel on it, right? And I was, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old at that point. And we lived in Cincinnati, then we moved to Virginia, to Richmond, Virginia, and then we moved to Cleveland, Ohio. And this is around the time that we moved to Cleveland, Ohio. And that same year, on June 22nd, 1969, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio caught fire when floating pieces of oil slick debris were ignited by sparks caused by a passing train. The fire didn't last that long, but it caught the public's attention, and it led to the National Environmental Policy Act, which was signed in 1970, January 1, 1970, and then eventually it led to the Environmental Protection Agency. We moved from Cleveland, Ohio to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in 1972, and in June of that year, there was a flood in Harrisburg, and Wilkes-Barre were hit really dramatically. And this is one of the streets downtown Harrisburg, and you can see how bad it was. So we're talking about the 1970s, and in 1975, or at least this is where this is from, the Vietnam War. We finally pulled out of there. You had the first Earth Day in 1970, April 22nd. We wore earth shoes. I don't know if anybody remembers those, but they were supposed to be more ergonomic than heels, and they were kind of funny. And there were gas lines at the gas stations. The oil crisis of 1973, caused by OPEC oil, the OPEC oil embargo, made kind of sort of a fake shortage of gasoline. And so we had odd and even gas rationing. So the restrictions required drivers to buy gas on a certain day or week, or days of the week or month, depending on the last digit of their license plate. The speed limit was lowered to 55, and it really did help conserve fuel, but it also saved people's lives. Jimmy Carter had solar panels put on the roof of the White House, and there used to be these little signs everywhere above light switches, and there was one in the kitchen at K for very long, just said, "Turn off the lights." And we really did do that. I mean, as a kid, I learned that I should turn off the lights when I leave the room, right? My kids don't do it, but still. So things were looking pretty good in terms of, climate, trying to sort of deal with the climate issues. In 1979, 3 Mile Island, a nuclear power plant outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, had a partial meltdown of its reactor number 2. And it was the most significant accident in U.S. commercial nuclear power history. I was completing my first year of college at a satellite campus of Penn State, and I would drive by this, and it was just on the other side of the river from where I would drive by every day. And we didn't know whether we were going to have to evacuate or not. Everything kind of just slowed down, and people were kind of, not knowing what to do. But eventually we didn't have to evacuate. The reactor number 2 is decommissioned. Reactor number 1 was closed down in September of 2019. But Constellation Energy now expects to restart unit number 1 in 2028, delivering power to offset electricity used by Microsoft's data center in the area. At that point, I transferred to, well, I went to Penn State, and then I transferred to Tyler School of Art, and this is a picture of one of the buildings of Tyler School of Art. And in the area, in that area, you had a lot of steel mills. Bethlehem Steel was based in that area, headquartered in that area. And I lived kind of near one of these things. I mean, it was a driving distance. In their heyday, Bethlehem Steel produced steel for the shipbuilding. And during the World Wars, they were a major supplier for steel for the war efforts. By the 1980s, the steel industry was in steep decline in the US, and the mills, if operating, were greatly reduced. So this is a drawing I made as an undergraduate. And I'd go out and sit in my car, you know, and do these drawings on these 22 by 30 inch pieces of paper, right, in my car, right, because it was usually cold. And then I'd sometimes take them back to the studio and make paintings, but generally speaking, the drawings were, you know, just graphite drawings on their own. Okay. So, wait a minute, let me go back to this. So I was interested in how these big, sort of powerful symbols of the Industrial Revolution and human progress were, in the end, subject to death and decay like everything else. So these are like from the street. Okay. So a little bit about 19th century landscape painting, which has got a problematic history in this country. In the 19th century, the Hudson River Valley school painters were already starting to document the changing landscape that the Industrial Revolution and colonialism brought to the Americas. In 1839, Thomas Cole was commissioned by the New York State Canal Commissioner to paint Portage Falls before it was destroyed by the construction of a canal. These landscapes are really, really loaded. The colonial gaze and the terraforming of colonialism and Western expansion is shot through American landscape painting. They're always beautiful, right? But they're always problematic. I just gave an assignment today in my class, I don't know if anybody's here, about doing a landscape painting and investigating the sort of the landscape that they're going to be painting historically. Okay, so this is a painting by John Brett that documented a glacier in 1856. This painting was recently shown at a show at Huntington Library. They explored the impact of the Industrial Revolution and the environment. You're going to see a piece of mine that looks really like this, but I didn't know this painting, so. And finally, Edwin Drake was commissioned by the Seneca Oil Company to look for oil in Pennsylvania around the area of Titusville. And at the time, oil was primarily used to create kerosene for lamps, and thus began the oil boom in North America. Okay, with all that in mind, you're going to sort of recognize how those things play into the work that I'm doing. This is the first body of work that I did that sort of addressed climate change issues. And this was at the Longmont Art Center, curated by Jessica Kuhlman Parker, who's a wonderful curator, independent curator that lives up in Traverse City. And she does work with the Common Grounds space up there. So, and she's looking for people to show, I think. So, okay. In his book, Becoming Earth, How Our Planet Came to Life, Ferris Jaber calls fossil fuels an outrageously extravagant source of energy. He says that they are essentially an ecosystem in an urn. He cites environmental scientists and policy analysts Václav Smil's calculation that a single gallon of gas equals roughly 100 tons of ancient life. That's the one statistic I'm going to leave you with. I couldn't believe that when I read that. Okay, with this work, I was trying to make images that were frozen in time, that really were monuments to these disappearing geological features. They were meant to represent the dramatic speeding up of the pace of climate change. And some of these things are like iconic images. Niagara Falls. This is based on a sort of old, antique photograph of the Great Glacier, which doesn't actually exist anymore. It's way back here. You see it all the way back there. Okay. Some of these pieces, the very early ones, were real gestural because I'd been doing performance art for about 3 years. And I started making things again, and I started making them in real gestural way. I was using my hands to paint them and drag down, and I'd get holes in them, and I'd just patch them. And I liked that. I liked how that seemed like what we do to our environment when we screw it up. We patch it, and it's never going to be the same, right? So I liked that. I'd also started bringing text into it, and in this one I would scrape the text into it. I don't know what I used. This was ink, by the way. So this is one of the very early ones that had patches, and they were less illusionistic. They were a little more expressionistic, I guess you can say. But then they started to look like things again. And so this piece was actually lost in the mail. And so I did a piece called Ode to a Lost Iceberg, but I'm not sure. So I felt like the work would be a little too pedantic if I didn't do something more than just talk about climate change and show icebergs and stuff. It didn't feel personal enough. So I started to incorporate things that I started to incorporate love letters that I'd write. And I'd write them for the piece and for whoever I was thinking of. So I was hoping that it would make the pieces a little more, elusive or mysterious. And after that first show, I started to show the work away from the wall. And I liked what it did because it allowed the light to come through it, and you had to walk through it, right? They were moving around when they were on the walls anyway. And I like when you walk by them how your body impacted the landscapes the way that our bodies impact the landscape just being there, right? So I like that idea. The text started out being love letters to friends and lovers, and from the past and the future. I did one future one. But they became about my sons and Deb and my parents, and they were about people from my childhood, things like that. So the letters sometimes related to the images, but often the best ones didn't. And then there was some other kind of interesting kind of connection between the images and the text. So this is the one I said you're probably going to see a piece that has a glacier, but I didn't know that painting. And I was really trying to make this one really about the mark making and stuff. Deb said to me one time, she said she changes glacially slow or something like that. And so I made a little love letter about that in there. So let's see. The images, so this is ink on plastic. And the images themselves are not made with archival materials, even though the plastic is going to last a long time. That's the problem, right? The plastic the plastic is important in the work because without the plastic, as adding sort of some content to it, talking about how problematic plastic is, they're just kind of pretty landscapes, So Most of the pieces at this point had water in them because I think about climate change, I think about environmental degradation, whatever. I thought about air and water and whether it's floods, droughts, melting glaciers, accidents with pipelines, or the release of methane and other chemicals into the water system. All the water is so intertwined with these problems, and so that's why there's a lot of water images. This one was about my dad. My dad had ALS, and he died in 2006. And this piece was about him. It's called Gentle Waterfall. That's what he was. Whoops. Okay. So as the work went along, the pieces got darker and darker and more tormented, and they turned black. I just had a bunch of black pieces for some reason. I don't know why. But they never made it out of the studio. But I was reading a book called The Reason in a Dark Time, and I think it was like depressing me. But I made these two pieces about 3 Mile Island. So this is the Susquehanna River, and there's 3 Mile Island back there. And this was a piece that was 3 Mile Island. This is kind of the view I had when I drove by it. And my friend Andre was commuting with me, and this is about my friend Andre, who's one of the smartest people I ever met. At the same time, I was doing these little pieces. I've seen them if you've been in the gallery. They're like this big, and they're silver point drawings. And these are about accidents that happen daily in the Bakken up in North Dakota, and other places in the world, but you never hear about them. They're really underreported. And so some of the big ones you hear about, but like train derailments and sort of things like that, but oftentimes you don't. My idea here is that I was trying to make them look a little bit like 17th century Dutch painting of clouds and stuff, so the people would go, oh, that's kind of cool, and they look at it and they come up and they go, oh, that's not cool. So that was the idea behind the small things. And so here's another one. This one's kind of an oddball because it's two of them put together, almost like a film strip or something like that. And these are silver point drawings they're on different surfaces, but mostly a lead white ground. And there's another one. That one's down there. It's really hard to see them like this because they're only this big. So, okay. So my partner poet and distinguished professor of creative writing at Iowa State University, Deborah Marquardt, was doing research and writing about fracking, the fracking industry in her home state of North Dakota. She wrote a really, really long poem about fracking, and she was making trips to North Dakota and teaching writing workshops all through the state, supported by a grant from North Dakota Humanities. And this is when I started getting interested in the sort of fracking kind of imagery. So I made a couple of one-off pieces. This is in the studio, and the light's just coming through. I thought it was fancy looking. And then there's another one. I never showed these, but they led me to do a piece. I went to, in 2016, I hadn't done a residency in 15 years because of kids, right? And so I decided, well, I'll go to do this residency in Ovillars, France. So Deb and I both got residencies there, and we went, and I did my first really big piece. So this is a piece that is called Something Gained, Something Lost. And this is actually in Western Space at Art Prize. Don Desmond kind of curated this into that space. And so that was shown there. I don't think I've shown it anyplace else. That was back when I wasn't sure what I was doing with the top of the things. So you get this kind of scallop thing. I don't like that too much. But it's pretty cool. So when I was in France, and I was doing this piece, all the French people were like, oh, fracking is illegal in France. And then I'd go out in the backyard of the residency and I'd look across there and that's what you see, right? I'm like, okay, well that's maybe better, I don't know. So that residency was really productive, so I decided to do another one, and I went to the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts in Amherst this time, Amherst, Virginia. And I planned to do another fracking piece, but on the way down, I was driving down, and I saw a bunch of signs, and I realized I was in coal country, so I decided to do a piece about mountaintop removal, and coal being one of the dirtiest ways you can get energy. I thought it made sense. So there's me. That's when I'm done. Somebody took a picture of me. But the piece was, the residency was 5 weeks long, and I did it. The piece is about 95 feet. It's down there. This is the first, and then I brought it home. I put it in a box. I brought it home, and I never looked at it until this summer when I was going to hang it to get it ready to hang in the show downstairs because I didn't have any place to show it. So I was really thinking about these things as scrolls at this point. So people always ask me how you do it. How do you do it? It depends on the piece. But in this piece, this was my studio, and there's a wall here, and I would work on this section, and then I would move it over, and work on another section. And I'd go up and down on ladders and things. So that's how I did this piece. And you can see, if you look at this one downstairs in the gallery, it's really much lighter and a little more ephemeral. When you put them on the walls, they're a little higher contrast. So this is what it looked like when I was working on it down there. I kind of like how this element fades away downstairs. Because when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about a ship almost on the ocean, kind of on a horizon. But it's a drag line, and so this is the bucket that goes down and picks up the coal and goes like that. And these buckets are huge. I mean, they're really gigantic. So this is just another part. It's the terraced sort of areas where they dug the coal. And they have a big barn, and so I hung it in the barn before I left and took pictures of it. So this area of the drawing, this is an ash pond. So what happens is once they burn the coal, they got to do something with what's left over, and they mix it with water and they put it in these ponds. But the problem with that is that they leak, right? So the Environmental Protection Agency found that 95% of ash ponds leaked, seeping in the rivers and groundwater. That was when, at least that statistic was when I was doing this piece. Okay, so extinguishing the fire. This is the piece I showed you at the very beginning. So this piece is, it's about, again, our contributions to climate change. And it primarily focuses on the oil and gas industry's desire for profit and the impact of fossil fuel extraction and consumption has had upon our natural environment. The structure of extinguishing the fire is loosely based on Dante's 3 types of sin: incontinence, violence, and fraud. The 3 types of sin take one lower into the depths of hell, with fraud being the most egregious of the offenses. Incontinence is defined by Dante as a lack of self-restraint, moderation, or self-control. Violence is a category of sin with offenses against oneself or one's own property, as like suicide and squander, are more severe than violence against other people and their property. Finally, fraud includes actions taken by panders, seducers, flatterers, hypocrites, thieves, false counselors, counterfeiters, and falsifiers, in descending order of depravity. So, this piece is divided into 3 sections. There's 3 40-foot drawings, okay? The first one is incontinence. And this depicts flaring of natural gas. So at the time, it's a little different now, but at the time, at least in the Bakken up in North Dakota, when you frack, you have this byproduct of flaring. Well, they weren't capturing it because there was such a boom, they were just trying to get as much oil out of the ground as they could. And so they were in such a hurry because they were worried about a bus coming, right? So they would just flare the gas. Now, I was up there last summer, and they're doing a much better capturing it. But at the time, and all over the world, they flare gas all the time. So let's see. So I see this as an example of what Dante would call, incontinence. We don't have self-control. We're wasting things that we could be using. So violence represents, in my work, violence represents oil extraction, transportation, and refinery accidents. So these are all like blowing up rigs and stuff like that. Regardless of the cause, there can be no doubt that accidents result in violence against others and their property. Petroleum companies and governments are responsible for safety regulations to prevent such accidents, but they are constantly challenging the oversight. These things look the same on both sides, but when you have text on there, it's backwards. So global warming caused by emissions from burning fossil fuels is the most serious and irreversible consequence of our dependence on oil, gas, and coal. Transportation emissions represents the largest single source of toxic air pollution in the United States. Bill McKibben defined the problem in his November 2018 New Yorker article like this. Alex Steffen, an environmental writer, coined the term predatory delay to describe the blocking or slowing of needed change in order to make money off of unsustainable, unjust systems in the meantime. The behavior of the oil companies, which had pulled off perhaps the most consequential deception in mankind's history, is a prime example. So I'm blaming them right now. So this last piece, fraud, is really addresses the effects of climate change and specifically wildfires. The whole piece is about wildfires, which is timely, I guess, but it's always timely because we've had them really bad for a while now. So extinguishing the fire examines, sorry, I touched something I shouldn't have. Extinguishing the fire examines the failings of human nature and the frailty of the natural environment. Okay, so we're back to some pieces that are downstairs. I bought my house in 2007, and in the June of 2008, Richard was at my house for dinner, and we had a 100-year flash flood. The water in like an hour, it seemed like, came up about here in my yard, and it's never done that before. My basement just started flooding, and Richard and Kathleen got down there and were helping me, get rid of the water. We had some shop vacs, and I don't know, it was a mess. And then later that year, we had 12 inches of rain over a 5-day period that were remnants from Hurricane Ike and another system that came from the west and dumped all this rain. And I ended up spending $20,000 to fix my house, just make sure, just so it wouldn't leak, all right? And it still does. Okay, so this is Kalamazoo. So this piece was made about that. Well, every time it started to rain, I'd freak out, right? Because my basement was finished, and I would freak out every time. It ended up with PTSD or something that caused muscle spasms all over my body. And I'd wake up in the morning and I'd be I'd just ache all over from my muscles just going like this all night long. Well, I told you my dad had ALS, so that's part of the problem. I started going, oh no, I'm gonna die, And so it took a while for me to get a diagnosis, and it wasn't ALS, thank God. So as those muscle spasms started to reduce, I'd start to have these dreams of my house flooding over and over again, and that's what this piece is about. And so this piece right here, this house right here is not my house, but it's got like a double image. And I like to think about that as memory and dreams and how the sort of past creeps into the future and things like that. So here's a shot of it in my studio, just so you can see the studio's not big enough for most of this work. And then here's a piece, there's a process piece. You can see how I'm working on it. I just kind of bunch it up like a scroll and work on different sections. So at this time, I'm thinking about going to the University of Alberta to do my Fulbright. They wanted me to have a show up there, so I made a couple of pieces that were Americana or something, you know. Wait and See and Uniquely American Experience are two pieces that were tornadoes. And the idea was to create this sort of really banal kind of domestic scene with this horrific kind of destruction coming up from behind it. And this one is actually, this is my driveway. And these are my houses across the street, and then I have a tornado going like that. And so the Uniquely American Experience relates to our particular sort of stubborn denial of climate change, and also the fact that tornadoes happen more in North America than they do anywhere else. Okay, so the Fulbright project. So as you all know, there was a pipeline break in the Talmadge Creek, and the oil went to into the Kalamazoo River, and Enbridge estimated as 819,000 gallons of crude made its way down the 2-mile trip to Kalamazoo River. The initial cleanup was continued until 2012, and the Environmental Protection Agency ordered Enbridge to resume cleanup in 2013, and I think they finished it in 2014, and then they put in a new line. It's now called 78. So when I was thinking about what I was going to do, I basically traced the oil back all the way up into Canada. Like there's Edmonton, and up there is Fort McMurray. And that's the tar sands. People are probably familiar with the tar sands. It looks like that, and it stinks. It smells terrible. It's one of the things when I visited, I just couldn't get out of my system. It just felt like it was in my sinuses or something. And right down the street from, right down the road from, and across the river from Edmonton is what they call Refinery Row. It's just refinery after refinery after refinery. It's unbelievable. It just goes on forever. This is a picture of Imperial Oil and Snap going by. They don't like it when you stand out in front and try to take pictures. I got a whole story about that, but I won't tell you. This was a picture from the parking lot where I was living in an Airbnb, and that is a flare. It's like the Eye of Sauron that oversees. This is Edmonton. So I thought this was really, really amazing, and also a good symbol for this the way we have to go through our lives, knowing the problem, but what are we going to do about it, right? And so all these people in Edmonton are just going about their business with the Eye of Sauron. You can hear it. It's like, you know, it's pretty incredible. So I decided to use the refinery as my sort of meditation on this idea. So I started making these pieces up there, and I started reading things out, these big chunks of stuff, and I thought about them as redacted information that either we block out ourselves or that we're not given by the oil companies. So this piece, so some of the pieces, the redacted stuff is kind of woven into it. This piece, I just wanted to really just slice it. And you also notice that there aren't any natural forms in any of these. So in this piece, the negative spaces are more incorporated into the image. I wanted to make these systems so complicated that no one person could possibly know what each pipe or fitting did. I also wanted the complexity to serve as a metaphor for how the oil and plastic industry and products are woven through our daily lives and economy. I imagine the viewer walking through the work as they walk through their lives with the telltale signs of the disaster looming all around them, but powerless to do anything about it. The petro and plastic is, like I said, shot through all that we do, like this, and like this, and like this. I mean, everything. It's just amazing. You start to pay attention to it. So here we are at the Richmond Center. Downstairs is a shot. And so what's going to change things? I mean, I think I agree with Naomi Klein when she says in her book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus Climate. She says, only mass social movements can save us now because we know where this current system left unchecked is headed. As I say in my artist statement about the precarious living pieces, those are the precarious living are the ones that are the refineries. These structures might one day be the archaeological record of our failing to acknowledge and confront global climate change. So that's my talk.